wiped before they lead to an even greater intrusion into our privacy.
The police actually seem to me to be very confused about the legislation. The law actually says that it's at their discretion to remove it. The problem is the police don't believe it's at their discretion, and they're certainly, I think, taking advantage of it to make sure they can build up their own database of as many children as possible.
If the police continue at the rate they're going, an estimated 4.25 million people will be on the DNA database by 2008.
My concern is that eventually this database will grow so large that the police will, the government will probably come back to Parliament and say, you know what, let's just tidy this up and make it compulsory and have everybody on the DNA database. And I think that this is really starting to concern people now, that actually this is all happening via the back door.
If you think such records won't be abused, listen to this. I'm on my way to Leeds to meet David Atkinson, a blameless law student who had the bad luck to have his fingerprints recorded. David's a confident young man who knows his law, yet he found himself in grave trouble.
I was out with a group of friends, and towards the end of the night, my friend went to the toilet and slipped on the floor of the toilet, and on his way down he pulled the toilet system from the wall.
As a result, David was arrested on suspicion of criminal damage. The charges were soon dropped, but the police kept his fingerprints and DNA. He thought nothing more of it, but a month later the police contacted him again.
I was told that they had forensic evidence linking me to a theft of mail from a postbox where a number of items of mail had been stolen and had been dusted for fingerprints which matched mine from I was arrested.
The police seemed convinced he'd done it, even though he was only 15 at the time.
Essentially, they've assumed my guilt based on the evidence that they had last time. It's as if there's a prejudice against people who've got their DNA and fingerprints on record. The police said again that it would be best for me to take a caution. I refused to do that, as there's no way I was admitted to a crime that I hadn't done. Whilst I was at the custody desk, I asked the officer if he could give me the names and addresses that the items of mail were addressed to.
It turned out that the letters found at the crime scene were in fact Christmas cards which David himself had posted, and that's why his fingerprints were on them.
So the innocent explanation for it came to light. Spoke to the officer again, and I was told that I'd be released and no further action would be taken. However, I still have all my details on the police records.
Do you really think that giving the state and the police those powers increases the freedom of the individual?
You pose the dilemma there, don't you? Suppose that your fingerprints are found at the scene of the crime, and you've given your fingerprints because you've been arrested wrongly on a previous occasion. Would you think it was a bad thing that if you had committed the crime on the second occasion, the fact they had your fingerprints allowed that to be discovered?
Look, we would all be much safer.
So what do you say to that?
Well, I say to that
question, that's a good thing.
Well, so put this to you quite simply. I've no doubt we'd all be much safer and more secure from all kinds of crimes and other threats if we all went around with barcodes tattooed on our foreheads, which could be read by machines.
Peter, you avoid having a proper debate about that. If you simply give absurd examples.
You won't let me finish the question. I said, of course that would be so. But the question is, it would be too high a price to pay. Surely the question that lies in front of any government, which is concerned both with protecting the liberty of the subject and with protecting the safety of the subject, the question which lies in front of the government is how far can it legitimately go?
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think it's a question of balance. You've got to focus extremely carefully on the extent to which it intrudes on the privacy and the liberty of the subject. So take the DNA swab example. If the 24,000 DNA swabs taken from people who are not subsequently charged with a crime or are charged but are acquitted materially helped in the conviction of a significant number of offenders, it might well be that that factor justified the retention of the swabs, which you agree with, I think.
But that's but you're arguing simply that the end justifies the means.
No, I'm not.
Isn't there any point at which you say this goes too far?
Of course. And
well, where is it?
Well, DNA swabs from those who are arrested and then either acquitted or not charged. If that materially helps in the identification of criminals and leads to legitimate convictions, I think the balance there is in favour of allowing it.
So, for the government, the ends do justify the means. David is now highly suspicious.
And now it really worries me that those details are on record, and the sort of information the government holds on you, it scares me to know what could happen next, when the next knock at the door will be.
They tell you that if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Well, that wasn't David Atkinson's experience. Those records are on the largest DNA database in the world, containing details of many, many innocent people. You could be on it if you chanced to be arrested for a driving offence. Nothing to hide? Nothing to fear? Are you absolutely sure of that?
The government's relentless push for identity cards means that all of us will eventually be registered and recorded in a way once reserved for convicted criminals. That means tens of millions of new opportunities for the police to jump to conclusions about anyone, even you. Once, our police were the servants of the law and of the people. In a startling change, they began to carry out the political will of the state. And the state itself, claiming to act in our interests, has been gathering increasingly detailed information on us. These growing databases are only one of the ways in which it seeks to pry into our lives. London's Leicester Square is the sort of place people come to relax, to shop, watch a movie or have a drink. But in a deep cellar nearby, a formidable surveillance system watches and records the actions of thousands. The argument for all this is that it fights crime. But is it really much use for that purpose?
It's not actually going to be very effective at stopping them from doing things which are minor nuisances, which are the main problem.
Some people are doing major nuisances. What we do when we see that is immediately alert the police, and they go and try and sort it out.
You couldn't call the police or expect them to do anything. By the time they got there, the person would be gone.
I agree, but if you see somebody pull a knife out in a fight, then you can and do, and they've been successful in stopping that kind of situation, really escalating into something very bad.
Doesn't it ever so slightly give you the creeps to see this level of surveillance on a British street?
I'm entirely happy knowing that I may be picked up on a CCTV camera a dozen times a day, because if I'm doing nothing wrong, I have some great satisfaction in knowing nothing's going to happen as a result of it.
One of the pieces of information that ID cards will carry will be one's face. If you then take all the faces from the ID database and you put them into a police-controlled database linked to facial recognition CCTV cameras, then you have one of the most perfect systems of surveillance ever devised.
The pretext for this prison-like surveillance is, as usual, that it will guard us against crime. But will it really? A scarf across the face or a hoodie will easily hide the identity of a wrongdoer, and unlike a patrolling constable, a camera can't intervene to anticipate a crime or do much while it's happening. In any case, do we really want to be watched all the time by authority like this?
You might think that the government now had enough ways of keeping tabs on us. You'd be mistaken. Here at the Imperial War Museum, I've uncovered the history of our state's repeated plans to compel us all to carry identity papers. Plans now returning in a far more fearsome form than ever before. The greatest threat to our freedom yet proposed.
Panic and war have always been the pretext for governments to interfere in the private lives of their citizens. The first identity cards in Britain were issued towards the end of the First World War. The same thing happened, more or less, in 1939. The idea was mocked by many MPs, but it went through Parliament in an afternoon, and the cards were issued. They continued in use into the early 50s, and it was then that people became sick and tired of them, after years and years of officious demands to be shown identity papers by people who knew perfectly well who they were. The government, sensing that the cards would be seriously unpopular if they tried to keep them on any longer, abolished them. And millions of people then did what they had been longing to do for years of war and rationing, and tore them up. Now we have the supposed war on